Elections. Presenting the statement this afternoon will be Ambassador Audrey Glover, the head of the ODIHR mission here. We will have time for questions from the media after Audrey presents our findings. So without any further ado, please, Audrey.
Thank you, Tom. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this press conference. It's good to have you with us. Holding this press conference today in the knowledge that VMRO and AA have not accepted the results of the election. As I said at the last press conference, we would follow post-15 October election developments and have a presence for the second round. And we have. We relocated our LTOs to municipalities where the race for mayor continued. We also had 88 short-term observers, 75% of whom were with us for the first round. So we're satisfied that we had sufficient coverage for the election yesterday. Our conclusion from the last round was that the election on the 15th of October contributed to strengthening confidence in the democratic process. That despite shortcomings, the legal framework provided a good basis for the conduct of democratic elections. Although gaps, ambiguities, and an inability to make consistent decisions within the law remained, voters' trust in the electoral process has decidedly increased. So how does that assessment measure up against the latest round? The legal framework continues to provide a sound basis for the conduct of democratic elections, although the SEC did not plan adequately for the second round. Most provisions of the Electoral Code are applicable for the second round. However, the Electoral Code does not clearly regulate certain aspects of the process, reducing coherence of the electoral framework. So how about the parties and campaigning? Campaigning took place against a backdrop of calm relief due to the increased confidence of voters resulting from a relatively uneventful first round. We have noticed that during the campaign, there was much more reaching out to voters across ethnic lines. Electoral contestants were able to campaign freely, and the freedoms of association, assembly, and expression were observed. However, there were a few politically motivated incidents, and allegations of foul play have been flying around. The OSCE ODIHR EOM has noted persistent and at times a few specific allegations of voter pressure and intimidation and vote buying by different parties. Some criminal complaints were filed with the Public Prosecutor's Office, one relating to road construction. The campaign this time was again low-key, with many small meetings, door-to-door campaigning, and the use of social media. It became more dynamic shortly before Election Day, and candidates were given more autonomy locally than before, and campaigning was therefore less centrally driven. There are only a few large-scale rallies, and they were organized mainly by SDSM. The Prime Minister attended some. He promised local development and EU and NATO integration. Some parties were concerned that the Prime Minister pledged government support for those municipalities who elected a DUI or SDSM mayor, because this undermined the separation of the state and party, which is contrary to OSCE commitments. The ceiling for campaign expenditures was the same as for the first round. 2 interim reports were required by contestants before the first round, but there were no sanctions if they did not submit them on time. Third round reports were due on the 28th of October, and only 5 contestants complied. All were published on the SEC website. So what about the role of the SEC? Although it has improved its transparency between the rounds by more consistently announcing sessions in advance and posting some decisions online, it continued to make some decisions behind closed doors. Neither did it sufficiently prepare for the second round. For example, additional training for MECs was too little and too late, and it gave hardly any information for voters about the second round or gave timely financial support to 10 municipalities with blocked accounts. It identified where additional training was needed, but it didn't implement it nationwide. Positively, 6 MECs on their own initiative organized additional training for the election boards. The work of the MECs was generally assessed to be positive. However, at least one case of perceived political bias was noted in the run-up to the second election. Over 40 complaints were made to the SEC on the first round and were decided in an open session with discussions put on the website. All, however, were rejected, and discussions at times were antagonistic between some of the SEC members. The manner in which complaints were handled challenged the rule of law and due process in contravention of OSCE commitments. Voter lists were not updated during the 2 rounds of voting. This prevented those who became 18 during that period from being able to vote. In addition, more than 900 voters in penal institutions were unable to vote because they lacked identification. Furthermore, the SEC adopted a decision by which voters who were on voter lists but whose identification documents expired between the 2 rounds were not allowed to vote in the second round. Previously, persons in that situation had been able to do so. The SEC, however, did urge voters to renew their IDs, but this caused some confusion. In relation to media, news coverage of the campaign was limited, but increased in the final week. In private media, the paid advertising was dominated by the 2 larger parties and was mostly negative in tone. The public broadcaster provided contestants with free-of-charge airtime during prime time, and 5 candidates used this opportunity. Media monitoring of the second round indicated that the public broadcaster covered all contestants in a balanced way and in a neutral tone. A high number of paid advertising spots, negative in tone, were largely used by VMRO and at times by SDSM. So how does all this add up? The 29th of October second round of mayoral elections was competitive, and the respect for fundamental freedoms contributed towards the conduct of democratic elections. The campaign was short and subdued, with parties vying for support beyond their traditional base, though occasionally using aggressive rhetoric. Isolated cases of misuse of administrative resources and vote buying were reported. Media continued providing balanced coverage of the contestants, but this was overshadowed by negative campaign spots. Election day overall was professionally managed. Although the performance of polling staff during counting could have been improved, tabulation was assessed as efficient and transparent. At the last press conference, we said that those elections saw the country's democratic progress advance and the confidence and trust of the voter in the electoral process increase. We think that these elections contributed further to strengthening confidence in the electoral process and the democratic progress of this country. We will be providing our second and final report within 2 months after the completion of this electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. As I mentioned, we now have time for questions from media. If you do have a question, I would ask you please to just raise your hand. We'll have a microphone brought to you. And before you ask your question, please just give us your name and the media outlet you represent.
Теута Бучи, Тавошења. Како го оценувате појавувањето на премиерот Зоран Заев и поддршката што тој им го даде на неколку кандидати од ДУИ, бидејќи тоа не е според принципот на поделба на власта од партијата?
Right. Sorry about that.
So there's a little problem with the translation there for a moment with the headset.
She's now translating.
Oh, we've got it. Okay.
Yes.
Apparently there was a difficulty with turning on your channel. Could I ask you, could you please just repeat the question? Sorry about that. Yeah.
Како ја оценувате поддршката на премиерот Заев што тој им го даде на кандидатите на ДУИ? Бидејќи тоа е, како што спомнавте, е во спротивно со принципот поделба на државата од партијата.
The support of itself doesn't separate state and party. It was only that the Prime Minister said that in those areas where a DUI candidate or a SDMS candidate had managed to win the electoral race, that he would ensure that in those instances that money would be given to the municipalities. So the fact that SDSM and DUI are in coalition is not problematic at all. It's what the Prime Minister said.
Further questions? Do we have this one? The back, yeah.
Горан Трпеновски, дигитална редакција, сакам да кажам. Вчера лидерот на ВМРО ДПМН упати големи обвинувања на целиот изборен процес и не ги признава изборните резултати. Дали имате некој коментар за неговите обвинувања? И дека полицијата многу била вклучена во изборниот процес?
We have heard, of course, what the leader of the